She really gets it.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Gumbaynggirr people and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'm lucky enough to live on Gumbaynggirr country, and this is, for people who haven't been to Dorrigo, this is a picture of the Dorrigo Plateau. So it's a bit southwest of here. It's about an hour and a quarter or an hour and a half drive if we've got landslips that are down creeks. And I guess, after hearing all of the talk so far, I feel like some of the things I'm going to share with you today is related to what Uncle Ron brought up and Rebecca yesterday and Tyson this morning. I'm an associate professor at Southern Cross University, and I'm working on a project there at the moment on regenerative grain growing in Australia. So I'm working with different grain grower hubs to really explore what does that look like, what does it mean, what's the definition, what are the indicators. And I should say I came to academia and I call myself an accidental academic because I was more embedded in the community. I started off with forestry conflicts in Queensland, and then got into landcare and NRM, and I really did a PhD because I felt like I needed to ask some questions I couldn't ask safely in that work environment that I was in, so that's how I ended up here. So today I want to share with you, and it's quite a bit of information, about the natural capital, sustainability and social justice space. So a quick overview, I'll explore what is natural capital. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that term, it's fairly new. And just an overview of Australia's natural capital. And then looking at our land use and our population distribution, because there's some social justice issues there of, how we're distributed, where the wealth is, and how there's little sharing of looking after country, responsibility of looking after country in that exchange of funds that's required. And then I want to look at what's driving sustainability standards globally, because we have a new regulation in Australia where it's mandatory to do sustainability reporting and climate-related financial disclosures as of this year. Then I'm going to give an example of whether this whole natural capital new sustainability regulation can have an impact on mining on the Dorrigo Plateau, because at the moment we've got a lot of exploration licences appearing everywhere for antimony, so that inappropriate land use is coming back up to affect us. So I guess just what is natural capital? I don't like the term that much. I feel like it commodifies country or nature, but it does have its place in the financial sector. And basically it's a stock of natural resources which includes geology, soils, vegetation, air, water, and all living organisms. So it's basically country. And these environmental assets, they deliver ecosystem services that are essential to human health and our healthy economies. And I guess in recognition of the significance of natural capital, we now have international sustainability accounting standards that I'll talk about in more detail later, that they've been developed, but to measure the natural capital at the national level, we don't necessarily have something like that translated to what does that mean about my property or my farm. And that is a bit of an issue. So this is something I just looked at the last couple of days. So there's a few different indexes that do some assessment of how we're going as far as natural capital ranking is. And you see that the criteria that they're looking at is agriculture, biodiversity, water, resources and pollution. And so we're ranked 76, which isn't so good. You see a lot of developing countries that are doing far better than we are, particularly in the agriculture and biodiversity area. And so I thought about, okay, so what is Australia's natural capital and what's its value? So this was the last ABS report that was done on, the monetary value, and Tyson, we were talking about how do we get into that space of where country actually has value in the financial sector. So if you look at that, it's like, what is it, $6.5 trillion was what our natural capital was valued at, and it was as of June 2018. I haven't repeated this. And most of that is the land value, right? But when you look at how our population is distributed, because I think ABS said, it's about $223,000 each for each person. But if you distribute that of how our population is, most of that wealth that's in country is benefiting urban populations and not so much the rural populations that are looking after country. So I just want to look at Australian land use management. And Uncle Rod, you brought this up about the Indigenous estate. So this was the latest figures that I could get from the AREA's mapping. But if you look at agriculture covers 55% of land use in Australia. The Indigenous estate, they're saying 20% owned, and then there's about 50% with that overlap there as well. So the latest records are saying 70% in all different forms with lots of overlap. But if you look at both of the maps, you see there's overlap with agriculture as well, which means there's a lot of agriculture going on in the Indigenous estate. And have a look at New South Wales, isn't it really what's in the Indigenous estate? They haven't really got much country there. So then if you look at how our population is distributed, and we're the most urbanised country in the world. This is from the latest figures that have been released this year, so about 27 million of us. But most people are actually in urban or peri-urban areas. Right? So if you look at the colours on the map, and you look, and I know where I live in Dargo, it's regarded as an outer regional area. But there's about 9% of Australians are managing most of the country. But in those rural community issues, they're quite, they're regionally, geographically isolated. They have poorer health outcomes, poorer access to primary health care service and lower incomes, high prices for goods and services, and low education opportunities. I know just in Ontario, it's not that far away. We had lots of landslips this year, so the mountain was cut off. I got a landslip on our road, which is only a one-way rural road, so none of us could get out for weeks. And it is really interesting, all of a sudden, what can and can't come up and down the mountain and how isolated you can get. So, just looking at that picture, and then looking at globally, Indigenous communities protect 80% of all biodiversity, which is quite profound. That's a global statistic. And in the latest Australian State of the Environment report, in relation to caring for country with the Indigenous land managers, the security of funding and increased resourcing is critical. And it's always, I guess that's why I ended up doing my PhD, because I was involved with land care in that sector, and funding was such a control drama for actually doing work on country and trying to restore landscapes. So I guess I see lots of social justice issues in Australia for the distribution of responsibility, and there's no money, and even if you look at the funding, I can't remember what it's called now, it's called Caring for Country, now it's called National Land Care Program, I think. Most of the money goes into administration or is distributed in other ways, and less is actually going to work on the ground. And I guess I just wanted to put it in the frame that most of the world now is urban, and that's only happened fairly recently. So if you look in 1950, 70% of the world was rural, 30% was urban. And if you think about that connection to nature, where your food's coming from, how healthy everything is, and I just changed the statistic this morning, because I used to say by 2030, there'll be 60% of the world in urban areas. Well, we're already there. We're already at 60%. So, the forecast in 2050 is 70%. I reckon it could happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And what's interesting is it's happening in China, in India. I remember when I was at the University of New England, we interviewed a guy from Nepal for a position, and he said, in Nepal, young people think farming is just something old people do. And so, there's and that's happening in Australia too. Most farmers are 60. They're struggling to find younger people coming through. So we've got some lessons for the rest of the world, I think, in our issues as far as social justice goes. But it is changing our thinking, and it's changing some of our leadership as well. And I guess why is the pressure for sustainable agriculture, so that's basically mainly my area of work, is that, you know, is it half of the Earth's habitable land is used for agriculture, which is quite significant. I think it's really important to remember, it's the same in Australia as well. Most, I think it's about 90% or more of farming is by farming families. So it's not big corporate agriculture. And if you look at the statistics globally, it's 608 million farms, and most of that food comes from small farms as well. So, you know, it's those family farms, I guess they're trying to be sustainable, produce food, make an income, and look after country. And I guess this is, I keep adding to this. So I've been working with mainly rural farming communities for years on what does it mean to be sustainable? What's the evidence I need? How do I show people I'm doing a good thing? You know, I've fenced off all of my creeks and rivers, and you know, this is how I'm managing my land. How can I document that, and who can I show that to? And it's a really difficult space because government doesn't want actually an agreed method. So as I went back, we can get a measure of what our condition of our natural capital is on a national level, but we have no idea how to measure it out on the farm scale. And so this is some of the work I've been doing. So remember, I'm an environmental scientist and a social scientist, but then the environmental scientist. So I love doing field work. And so I've developed some systems for farmers where we can look at their property, we can say what are the natural assets they have on their land, what condition is it in, and I write a report for that. I get them to collect the data using the method, so I've created something that's scientifically and legally valid, so it has some agency in the system. And I know the last group of farmers I worked with up in the northern tablelands, once we did all their reports, and they're pretty good, they took them to their bank manager. Oh, look, I'm a good land manager. This is when I found some things I'm not doing so well, and this is what I should change. But again, this is the very science of how healthy is country. Are the management practice I'm doing okay? Are they sustainable? What is sustainable? And I guess my question is, and this is a mosaic of up in Dorrigo where I live, we've got these mosaics of agri-environmental landscapes. They're European farming landscapes with native vegetation systems. Right? And that's the reality. And I guess I'm bringing in the science for legal validity for farmers and land managers, but there's this question about the European stewardship of those farming systems, or the Indigenous stewardship of those native systems, and how, I guess that's what, you know, I'm curious, and something that Howard and I have talked about that we'd like to explore in his place. How do we unpack those sorts of systems about the health of country? And then, you know, because one of the other things is, and I'm organically certified, I've seen what's happened to farmers in the carbon market. So the people who make all the money are the ones that come and measure and take the samples and off-sell it or whatever, and the person who's actually sequestering the carbon gets hardly anything at all. So there's a lot of issues with that. So we don't want another certification system where the person in the middle is going to make all the money and the person that's doing the right thing actually doesn't get anywhere, or recognition, I guess. That's a big thing I hear all the time. If I'm not doing the right thing, please tell me what that is, or how do I get recognition to show that I'm sustainable, that I'm doing the right thing from healthy country. And I hear from farmers all the time they would really like an Indigenous perspective of that. How can they get some feedback? And I see this as a potential area for businesses, for young Indigenous people. We have hardly any people out in the country anymore from a science perspective measuring anything. We've lost that capacity and also service. And so I guess just some of the issues for Australian land managers, we haven't got a property scale methodology. It's a crowded space, so government keeps funding all these projects and they don't pick one to go, that's the one we want. Now we're talking about natural capital accounting, if you like, at a farm scale. you had to put a tax return in and we had no methodology and we kept using different methods all the time. It's sort of the same thing. And some of it's not community driven, it's driven through other platforms. And banks and markets and insurance companies are starting to ask farmers, what's the condition of your natural capital of the farm? And some of the value chains are also asking that as well, but we've got no method to do that. And so you see, some of these, this is coming through in the insurance and financial sector about natural capital. So they've got it now that actually, if we don't look after the environment, there's no us. And so I'll just move on to, so in that space, it's the sustainable agriculture space. But there's all this sustainability reporting growing now, and it's coming from a global level. I could put up lots of disaster stories up there about the environment, I'm sure everyone knows, but biodiversity collapses, we've got ecosystem collapse. Our greenhouse gas emissions are going up, even though we know what's going on. Everyone's heard of the Anthropocene? Anyone heard of that? You know what the Holocene is? Holocene, the interglacial that we're supposedly in, which is a geological epoch. Well, the Anthropocene is us. I think of it as us collectively, unconsciously, we've changed every Earth system. Like the universe. So, that's sort of accepted now that we've moved out of the Holocene into the Anthropocene because we've changed the climate that much. So it is pretty urgent that we do something drastic, and I guess all those international agreements and discussions are trying to turn things around. So the Australian government's committed to nature positive by 2030. We've made commitments about biodiversity, we've made commitments about seed sovereignty, we've made commitments on sustainable development goals, we've made all these commitments on the Paris Agreement. 30 by 30, we're going to have 30% of the country under protected areas by 2030. And these are some of those agreements. And they're being pushed by how where we are on the planetary level. And I think it was it Troy was talking about the mullet run yesterday. And so my brother's a fisherman on the central coast. So he does a mullet run every year, and we got brought up by a fisher person. This year, my mullet, the sea temperature was 5 degrees warmer than usual. 5 degrees. My brother said 1 degree is huge, but 5. And so the mullet just didn't run there. And so we are all being impacted by different climatic events that are extraordinary. So it is urgent. And so, and this is something you were talking about, Tyson, I'm hopeful. I'm a bit of a cynic, but I'm hopeful. So all of these things, the main things are we need to stop the climate issue. We need to get it down to 1.5 degrees Celsius, plus we have to stop the biodiversity collapse. So I won't read all this out other than if you look at IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standards, they've created new sustainability standards. And this is for the corporate sector. So there's two standards. One is on sustainability reporting, the other one is climate-related financial disclosures. The next one that will come after that is nature-related financial disclosures. So you'll see, and I'm curious to find out from anyone from the States whether you guys have new regulation or legislation for sustainability reporting. Australia does, so you can see and sort of continue that on. So I don't know how many people are aware that this year new legislation was passed, and as of the 1st of January, certain corporations, and they're scaling it, so there's the bigger corporations to start with, then the next ones and the next ones. And a lot of corporations are feeling, even if I'm not legislated to do it, I should make those reports anyway. So one is they do a sustainability report, that's more voluntary, and that's under a thing called Environmental Social Governance, ESG, which I'll cover a bit next. But the other one is it's mandatory to do climate-related financial disclosures. So as of this year, Coles and Woolworths and all those sort of big, Bunnings, all of those have to start reporting on their climate-related financial disclosures, and most of them are doing sustainability reporting, but this standard didn't exist before, so now they have to comply with it. And so these are the two new standards, and it's under the Corporations Act, so ASIC, Australian Security Investment Commission, I think they're called. They have a role to play as well, so they can actually prosecute. And I guess what I'm seeing, and where farmers are coming into this, and I can see in the value chain, they'll push that back to, and I'm hearing already, there's some agricultural products. So say, for example, in grain, there's one group, they have to get European certification that aligns with this for their grain to sell into the European market. So we're starting to see some of these changes, which is great. My concern is if you've got a piece of degraded country that happened from the 1800s and some of the Indigenous estate that's being handed back, and that's our collective responsibility to rehabilitate that. It's not one person because they all of a sudden own it or have responsibility for it. So what they're trying to do is elevate this thing called environmental social governance. Have anyone heard of that? ESG, yeah. And what does that mean? So environment, this is a simplistic thing. It refers to an organisation's environmental impacts and risk management practices. Social refers to the organisation's relationship with its stakeholders, and governance refers to how a company is led and managed. And that was something Rebecca brought up yesterday too about governance. And so these standards actually have set some rules that companies have to follow. And I just found this Woolworths they've done their last sustainability report last year. It'd be interesting to see what they do this year. And I know that they bought the trademark called regenerative farming. So they bought the trademark. Now, we don't know what they're going to do with that or whether they have a management practice or not. And then we've got all these other companies now doing ESG risk rating on these companies themselves. So it's an opportunity for their activities and investments and behaviour to become more transparent. And I'm hoping it's not all greenwash, because there is legislation behind it and ASIC does have power. And I guess my question is, because I always like to put what's all this theory and stuff out there and is it going to work? So my question is, can natural capital, the value of the country, basically, and sustainability reporting stop mining the Dorado Plateau? So there's antimony has been mined on the Dorado Plateau. The last time it was taken out was in the 1970s at a place called Wild Cattle Creek, which is where that red dot is. That's a derelict mine that's still pumping heavy metals into the Wild Cattle Creek, Beilstone River. And there was pollution down at Urunga, which I think it cost the government $10 or $15 million to clean up. And they didn't actually remove it, they just put a big liner in and put it back in. That's at Urunga, where there used to be an antimony processing plant. So what's happened? I spent about 7 years of my life between 2009 to about 2015 or 16, because there was a group called Anchor Resources, who was really funded by China, who set up an exploration thing, and they wanted to create a big mine here. And they spent $14 million and then went belly up and became a Hong Kong holding company, and we thought that problem had gone away. So we had a group called Dorrigo Environment Watch, and we actually disbanded it because we couldn't get community support anymore, and it looked like the mining issue had gone. Now in the last couple of months, a mob called Trig Minerals, who are a company from WA, are beating up this Wild Cattle Creek, saying it's the biggest antimony deposit in Australia. I put this up because you can see where Dorrigo is. So see the light blue, they're all exploration licences up for application at the moment. They will be approved. All the purple ones are approved. Now, that's all antimony, so it goes then Buckout, Maxwell, that's all trigs. The blue ones up around that's the trigs. There's another one called United Antimony, another one called Hillgrove, and Hillgrove is an existing antimony mine in the red. So all of a sudden, this was sort of hardly anyone to the last 6 months. Every time you check on MinView, there's just more and more of them. And this is what we're up against. Trig, powering our future through critical antimony resources. And they've got, the last time I looked, which was yesterday, they've got a market cap of 71 million and enterprise value of 65 million, a company that didn't exist, yes, not far off. And the thing about critical minerals is, because you'll hear this in the news all the time now, and I think, was it you, Uncle Rod, that brought up this is the next thing, well, it's here in our backyard already. It's not. China has 60% of the world's antimony resources. They closed the gate, they're not exporting that anymore. And in the current geopolitical situation, antimony, and they say, oh, it's for renewable resources or whatever, but we found it's more for weaponry than anything. And so all of a sudden, the price of antimony is sort of going up because it's called a critical mineral, even though it's only a critical mineral because of geopolitical issues. That, oh, we can't get some from China, America's scared. They've said it's all in the AUKUS, they're bringing into the AUKUS agreement, and there's no tariffs on antimony. And the New South Wales government and the Australian government is supportive of critical minerals, right? Without even looking at where they're talking about taking it out. If I go back here to this picture, see across there, they want a 6-kilometre underground mine. So you see that line of where it sits. 6 kilometres, and they're going to go under, and it'll go under a national park. It's unimaginable. So, I guess I'm wondering, how do we as a community, in our Day2 community, how can we use the natural capital, those natural assets, they're more valuable than an antimony mine, which would just be a foreign investment company anyway, taking all that out. And I've tried to look, they haven't got an ESG report yet, and they haven't got an ESG ranking because they're fairly new. And they did have something on their webpage about ESG, but they've taken that off now. So how can, if the value of country, if we can put a value on country and the dollar cents, how do we do that in this situation? And that community's got no money and they've got 140 million. But anyway, so I'll just go back to why I've got the Achilles thing. They're calling this the Achilles project at Cattle Creek. One of their other projects is called Spartan. And so what we're proposing to do, rather than fight the mining company, we want to go to the government to say the values of the plateau are greater than what the antimony resource is, whether it's critical mineral or it's going to be defence or whatever. And what can we put on the table with that? So we've got World Heritage values, and those values around the World Heritage forests have to be compatible with that. We've got Indigenous cultural values and places of significance as well. There's a Greater Koala National Park that's about to be gazetted, and that will compromise that. We get high rainfall. We've got records up to 5,000 mils in history, but we can get 3,000 to 5,000 mils of rain and landslip hazards. We've got critical biodiversity, habitats, water quality, and it also feeds into a drinking water catchment. We've got high quality strategic agricultural lands. We don't have the infrastructure, so the roads are just one narrow thing going out to where the mine is. It's impossible. We don't have the infrastructure. Our council can't even fund their own roads, let alone an industry. And I guess, what I looked at, I used to be at the Centre for Agriculture and Law at UNE, and we did a lot of work with the mining issue out at Gunnedah and Narrabri, and found the community really changed when mining camps came in, and the housing issue and the community became quite divided. And we've also got a big Day2 Great Walk. I think government's committed millions of dollars into this new eco war. And there are precedences where mining has been banned now since we fought it last time. So that's all I want to share. I don't know if everyone knows the story about Achilles and his mother Thetis held him by the foot and dunked him in a river of Styx to make him immortal, but it was where his foot was held. That was his Achilles heel. So we're trying to find the mining company's Achilles heel. But that's it, I'm done. I don't need the shark thing.
All right, time for questions. She didn't want the shark to come out.
Go. First of all, just to, like something to follow up is there's a lot of fern species that grow well on the plateau that are hyperaccumulators of antimony. And it's a good thing to get out of the ground because it's poisonous as hell. But phytomining's sort of a thing. And if you can get a plant there somewhere on the plateau, like where you basically harvest the plants after they've grown and absorbed all the antimony, and then you process them there. It's a heaps cleaner process than doing it from the ore or from the raw materials ripped out of the earth. It's it's cheaper, it's quicker, it's cleaner. The only problem is the yield isn't as big. But they might be happy while they're waiting to, I don't know, finish the genocide before they start doing the mining. Like they might be happy to have some plants there for a while. Then they might realise that slower yield over deep time. Some people want to do, longer term investments in their portfolio. That might work. Sorry, that's not the question. The question's even more complicated. I have to go. I'll go into detail with you after. But so, like, would you consider taking the certification process and turn it into a ratings thing that assigned pricing increase for real estate? So, because basically nothing's going to work. Like with power, with capital, anything like all of these things, government legislating that they need to, invest this much in sustainability. Most people find legal ways around that. It's the reason why carbon credits, there's so many junk bloody assets out there, and it's bullshit. And same with biodiversity offsets. We call them distinction offsets. It's not real. Because it's like a multi-level marketing scheme. It's a pyramid scheme. There has to be a greater fool. But like, if you can offer capital, offer power, like a chance to increase the size of their assets, with a new asset class, say biomass equity. Okay, if you change your certification system into a rating system, then what you're doing is assigning an increased price and dollar value. So you're actually making quantifiable that which is usually only qualitative, like, oh, nature is beautiful and we value nature. Future. So basically, you assign a rating, then you can approach people and say, hey, good news, your real estate is now worth 10% more. You can up the price of that and claim that as biomass equity. Then you're creating a new asset class, and then on it goes. Would you be interested in doing that?
I guess, that's an interesting approach. I guess, we did a lot of work some years ago on looking at all of this commodification of carbon, water, biodiversity, and we found in Tasmania, like if it's not on the title, someone can asset strip property and sell off the biodiversity assets and the carbon credits and the water without anyone even knowing it, right? And so again, we're sort of commodifying. I guess what I'm trying to look at is, I tell farmers, don't trade anything off your property. Because when you come to have to show your sustainability and your biodiversity and your carbon, you've sold it. And someone else is claiming that. And so where I see the opportunity with this is that the banking sector is saying, I want to know what the condition of your natural capital is. Not that they can tell you how to measure it, but because we're not going to lend you money, right? And then the real estate market will pick up on, oh my God, natural capital is important. some insurance companies are saying, we're not going to insure your property. So it's early days, and I'm hoping when it comes in that people are rewarded for doing the right thing and not selling it off, because it hasn't worked. So it's a really difficult, and I guess it's, I'm curious about what's a language of stewardship, and what does that look like compared to this market-based approach where we're all told to say, the market language, but that's, it's not about that. So, I mean, it's a wicked problem. I have to solve it. The certification thing I worry about because, again, like the carbon trading, it's the person in the middle that seems to make all the money. Not how do you support someone who's doing the right thing? Then it's not going to cost them a lot of money. And then in this situation that we're back to the day of Plateau, and anyone here from the Clarence Valley, because there's a lot of mining applications going in. The EVO are running, the Environmental Defenders Office is running a roadshow the week of, I can send you, or I can send it to Graham, you can send it out, on what the rights are and how we deal with this. Because it's massive. Before, we didn't have all the government and the Trump thing and everything behind it. It's all like, it sounds really good. And you're going, have you been to where they're talking about putting it? And it could be that this company is just doing a share market beat up and then sell it on to someone else.
There's a precedent, though, for measuring qualitative value when it comes to real estate. And that's, if a tree line gets cut down or a skyscraper gets demolished and suddenly a property has an ocean view or a spectacular view of the mountain or something like that, then there's pricing mechanisms for suddenly that real estate is worth 10% more, so it's already there, the mechanism and the precedent. But the potential of creating a whole new asset class of biomass equity is pretty exciting. But the problem is the ratings. You have to do it through a ratings system. And I just see your certification thing as having potential to become that.
Well, it's
that
good
ratings
news. I
mechanism.
wasn't proposing certification. It's how do you measure healthy country? And I'm curious, what does that look like from a Indian, the Indigenous foundation? I can do the science, but that's missing a whole dimension. And I see that as an opportunity, because who decides if the country's healthy or not?
Well, people want to improve their rating, to improve the value of their asset. And you can offer lots of tips for that, and you can offer tiers right up to like B+ or something. But then to achieve a AAA rating, that would have to be approved by the local land council. So
I know, I see a huge potential there.
then they can get people to jump through the hoops to get the AAA.
I just noticed that some of the licenses cover national parks. So
They do, but some of them border national parks, but one of them, they can go under.
yeah, right. So what does it then have to be classified as to stop mining activities?
So state conservation area, they can mine.
What?
Yeah, state forest, they can mine. It's only national park, and now I've found that they probably can go under a national park, whether that will happen or not. But the conservation areas, that's why we're waiting for the Great Koala National Park is going to convert some of those, but not all of them, to a national park.
All right, we're going to hold this over until after the last speaker. So hold your questions, remember them, write them down, so that we're going to line people up, sit people at that front table after the last speaker. In fact, the last speaker, your Q&A will be part of the group, just to make it more efficient.